It's always our gurus that we owe our knowledge and that whom we are indebted to. So first, it's our salutations to, so this is personally my gurus, but I believe that they're not just my gurus because they have taught and empowered lakhs of people. So I'm just a small dust in the big crowd. So on the right, we have a Siddha Yogi who was a Vaidya as well, who in fact stood for the propagation of what Siddha knowledge actually is and not the main curriculum, because he fought against what the Siddha BSMS students were studying, which was half-baked knowledge, just as our curriculums to an extent is. Our curriculum is not as bad as theirs when you look at it. And Krishnamaji, another rebel yogi who in fact fought and stood for the upliftment of our science and for the propagation of authentic Ayurveda, to understand what it truly is and to apply it in our lives, not just in your practice, in your clinic. So we'll move to the next slide. So the topic that we are going to deal with here, or the understanding that we are going to go through, is Ayurveda and Siddha, and understanding where is the line that is drawn between the two, and where this dimension is transcended, and how they both integrate together. And basically, when I say Ayurveda, we are all Ayurveda students and practitioners here, so there is no need for me to go into much elaboration, and Sir has laid out 99% of what I was actually going to deal with. So I just have to, all I'm going to do is skim over it, but draw little parallels and lines with practical understanding a little bit more. So when I say I talk about Ayurveda, it's purely mechanics. It's the physics that I'm talking about. And there is a realm beyond the physics. So for example, like Sir mentioned, you see the machine, you have the hardware. So what is functioning within the hardware is the software, and this is the dynamics of it. That's Ayurveda. What is beyond it? What is making this software function the way it does is the energetics of the body, and that is what Siddha actually deals with. Ayurveda does give us a glimpse of all these concepts. We come across the concept of prana, not just the prana vata, but the prana itself, which is a prana yatanas. We find all these other references, which is not one of the panchavayus. So what is this prana? We don't really go into much depth, but we are given clues throughout our samhitas. Then Sushruta Acharya gives us a clue regarding the difference between pitta and agni. So, of course, the Pachika Pitta we say is Tekte Dravatva, but there is an Agni or a Tejas that is more subtle than that. So Acharya Sushruta gives us a glimpse over there. And something more relevant is the concept of Ojas. And when we come to the concept of Ojas, we understand what Ojas is, but when we try to apply it in the disease aspect, we understand it in glimpses again. We see that Ojas is lost in case of Prameha, in case of Visha, but where and how do you approach it? How do you rectify this Ojas in depth? Again, we've only given a glimpse of this. So all of this is dealt more in the Rasavidya, Rasashastra and the Siddha science. So before we begin, another prayer or this in gratitude is towards the universal forces that govern this whole universe and this micro universe that is us and our bodies. So Lingeshwara, who's prana itself, but I've used the symbolic forms. So we worship them in the human form for our recognition and identification, and they are abstract forms. They don't have even this real form. So the prana, which is Shiva, the Agni, which is Shakti, and the Ojas, which is Dhanvantri or Vishnu. So these are the universal forces that govern us, and ultimately that we are bound to. Next slide. So the whole thing about our science is that it seems simple, but in the simplicity, we are yet unable to understand what it's actually talking about. It appears simple. You study Vayu, you study the English translation, the textbooks that we come across in first year of Ashtanga Hridaya, Padartha Vijnana. One of my friends, when I gave them the book, she was in fact engineer, an architect, and she was going through the Ashtanga Hridaya, and she went through it and she was like, what is this science? I'm opening it and all it says is gas and flatus. What is this gas and flatus that your book is talking about, that your science is talking about? So this major problem that we have had in our understanding is understanding what these are in their depth. So when I say the Vayu, it's not just wind, it's not just air. There's something more subtle. It's not what you see, it is something that is beyond it. It is a physics, it's a dynamics that it's talking about. So these are codified because our science is equally dangerous. It's not just as productive. So we use the science in a conservative manner, we use it for the well-being of mankind and nature, but the same science, when you understand what it actually means, if it goes and falls in the wrong hands, it can be just as equally destructive, because you have understood the code of nature. You have understood what is reality. You're transcending what we consider as Maya. So the whole complexity within simplicity is the fact that these are codified, it's a codified language. Our Samhita doesn't lay out things, it doesn't spoon feed you with information. The whole text, it's a code, it's a code book. It's for you to break that code and use it when, as and when required and when it's appropriate. Next. So it's the same thing. So just because things are laid out in a simple form, it doesn't mean it's as simple as it seems. There's something beyond it. And that's what our science is. And that's the approach that we must have to understanding our science as well. So again, like I said, Sir has covered up 99% of what I was actually going to deal with. So I'll just skim over it. And the first concept is, of course, 3 doshas. One thing that I always tell people is to always ask yourself or anyone stupid questions, however stupid that they might appear, because you get the best or the most wonderful answers out of it. So when I say, stupid, my question always was, when I was studying the 3 doshas, why are the 3 doshas only 3 in number? Of course, Acharya Sushruta mentions about the 4th dosha, but he himself mentions that it's in a specific context, and he himself acknowledges that it's 4th in a different context. But why are the 3 doshas only 3 in number? Why can't they be 2? Why can't they be 4? Why can't there be a difference in it? It's because of the simple fact that any dynamic, any action, be it in the universe around you or within you, it appears singular. So when I say life, for any alien or for any being, so say that you have gone on to space in a space rocket and you're looking at life on Earth, you ask of the person what is happening on Earth, he's saying that there's a life happening, there's a life process happening. So he is able to see it as a single entity or a single activity from distance. But when he comes into it or closer to it, he's able to understand what is a breakdown of it, how this single activity, which appears to be single, is actually composed of sub-dynamics within it. So now, for example, I always use this example of walking from one point to another. So say that I'm standing here and I start my action and I'm walking from here until this spot and I end it over here. So to anyone who's seeing, and they would say that basically you walked. It's one single activity. You just walked. But what our acharyas, what our amazing scientists did is that they wanted to hack nature. They wanted to hack or reverse what is happening, the dynamics of what is happening. So what we call a samprapti is the process or the dynamics. So to reverse this, you need to actually understand what is happening in the first place. So they try to understand and break this down because of the simple reason that they have this knowledge, this wonderful knowledge. It's not just philosophical, but it's scientific, that the concept of Kshanabhangura Vada. So we just again push it off. We say that it's philosophy. Everything is destroying every second. You're a new person, you're a new personality. But it talks about the reality of matter or the material reality. So for example, this projector that I'm seeing right now, the next second, there is a change that is happening in its material nature because of the heat within, because of the function that's happening. So the plastic or the metal, you see that because of the heat, the bonds have probably changed. So it is not in the same state as what it was just a second before that. So there is no point in me studying something that is impermanent or temporary in nature, because there is a dynamic which is permanent in nature. The laws of physics which determine how everything happens in this earth or around us, outside of earth as well, this is permanent in nature. But the matter or the material reality that we view is impermanent. So how much ever I try to study about this chemical or that material, there's no point, because it's not going to exist. Again, it's not going to exist the next moment. There's going to be a new matter, it's going to evolve, there's going to be, or the previous material would have been perished. So there is no point in me understanding the chemical nature of reality around me, or basically the material nature alone. But instead I go into understanding the dynamics which governs the creation of this material nature. So my single activity of walking, which appeared to be single, is not single, because while I'm standing here, I'm actually initiating, I'm putting in energy to initiate the action and to walk. So I'm putting in effort to start the movement, which is the first process of vata, which is the initiation, the function of initiating any activity. So you see that I'm initiating it vata, And as I continue, this is not going to happen effortlessly as well. I still need to put in energy and effort to continue or sustain my movement until this point, which is the function of Kapha or Vishnu, who sustains and maintains everything that's happening. But it still requires energy for that process to happen. And as I terminate my action here, I'm not actually terminating it, because energy cannot be created or destroyed. Instead, I'm converting my dynamic action into static action. So I'm converting kinetic force into potential force or potential energy, which is the function of Pitta or Shiva. So we always think of Shiva as the destroyer. We say that he's a destroyer, but he's not destroyer. No god is going to destroy you for fun. He is an alchemizer. He transforms you from a lower state to a higher state of existence. He's an alchemist. He's a Rasavadi. So that's why you find the Siddhas primarily worship Shiva, whereas we worship Vishnu to sustain and conserve ourselves. Whereas the Siddhas, they worship Shiva because they want to transcend the material nature into a more, they want to go beyond the material reality. So Shiva, or the function of Pitta, becomes an action of the dynamics of conversion. So all three here, you see that none of it is structural in nature. At no point can we say that Kapha is me. It's a structure. It's something physical itself. It's the dynamics behind the physicality that we call a term as Kapha. So ultimately, any action, be it within us, outside of us, everywhere, be it even man-made in nature. That's why I use this example of the traffic light. It's either stop, it's either go, or it's wait. Again, when you travel in a car, it's either you put your accelerator, you go forward, you brake and you stop, or you have the clutch which converts or helps you shift the gear into a higher speed. Everywhere, be it man-made or natural, it is these three dynamics that it ultimately breaks down to. And this is why you have three doshas, which are only three in number. So this is the ultimate fundamental understanding of why doshas are the way they are. So doshas aren't something physical alone, but these are the dynamics behind the reality that we view around us and that's happening within us. So the first one of Vata, as Sir already mentioned, you have the concept of Akasha and Vayu. So exactly as Sir said, I'm going to keep saying as Sir said, because he already covered all of this. But so when we say Akasha, we always think of empty space. It's our immediate tendency to think of something completely vacuum in nature or total emptiness. We think of the outer space. But as Sir mentioned, it's a relativity. It's a relative space. So say that this is at a height of say 50 centimeters or something, 100 centimeters, and the ground is at 0 centimeters. The difference between these two heights is the Akasha Tattva. It's not a complete vacuum that we see. If one hand is here and the other hand is here, the difference between these two is the Akasha. And the nature of nature itself is to always create an equilibrium wherever there is an imbalance. Homeostasis is the law of nature. So we find every single process happening around us or within us happening as a result of this balance that the body is trying to attain. So what happens is, wherever you have a difference of either pressure, concentration, volume, or even voltage. When you look at the definition of electricity or how electricity flows, it's basically a voltage gradient that allows for the electron to flow from a higher voltage to a lower voltage that enables the electron to flow. And this flow of the electron is what we call as electricity. It's nothing great. It's just that there's high voltage, lower voltage, electron moves. That's what electricity is. So any sort of movement or dynamics happens automatically due to this difference that is created. This difference can be in pressure, volume, temperature, or even voltage, electricity, the charge itself, as I mentioned. So the movement which is happening as a result of this difference is the Vayu. So if we find that wherever you have a difference, there's a Vayu that accompanies it automatically to create a balance. So if I spray one corner of the room with a bottle of perfume, within 5 minutes, the whole room will start smelling of the same perfume. The reason being that the concentration of that perfume is so much over there that it tries to create an equilibrium in this closed space by diffusing itself through. So we find the process of osmosis, diffusion, and all of these natural processes happening as a difference of this concentration or a pressure. And so this is an example that we see in the outside world around us with land breeze and sea breeze. During the daytime, the land heats up slowly. The land heats up fast, sea heats up slowly. So the pressure is higher over land, pressure is lower over the sea. So the pressure, because of this difference in the pressure, the wind blows from the land towards the sea during the day. During the night, the land cools down faster, the sea takes a longer time. Pressure is more over the sea, pressure is lesser over the land. And you find that the night time is when you have a lot of breeze that comes from the sea towards the land. So the difference in the pressure is the akasha, and the breeze that you're experiencing as a result of this pressure difference is the vayu. So this happens within your body as well in the simple process of the saltatory conduction of nerve impulse. So here it's beautiful. It's a beautiful process of a difference in the charge, or basically the voltage. So we see it as only chemicals. We see that the sodium channels are open, potassium channels are open, calcium gates are open, and there's a difference or flux. But when you study it in detail, you find that there's a potential gradient that is created over there, the action potential. Quite literally, when you study the process of the nerve impulse, they say that there's an action potential which is created. So what is this potential? The word potential itself is the akasha tattva that they're talking about. So what happens is over here, so this is the sodium that's been mentioned at the nodes, but what happens is you have the calcium which is positive, and you have the potassium which is negative in charge. So as the potassium comes within the nerve, when the gates open, there's a negative charge which is created. So the negative charge is in relation to the calcium which is at a positive charge. So it's not exactly 0 or 10, but comparatively when you see both of it, there's a difference in the charge which makes the calcium jump from one node to another node to compensate for the deficiency in the charge over there. So in that manner, we find that the neuron impulses or the nerve impulses travel throughout our body. And this is a beautiful example of how we have electricity which is conducted throughout our body. It's not just chemical transmission, but it's an electron which is jumping and flowing. And that is the very definition of electricity itself, prana. Next. Then the next dynamics is of pitta, where we find, Jala and Agni, two enemies, functioning together. The water usually puts out fire, and fire usually, evaporates water. But they need each other for living together or to function together. Because I always try to create a little controversy by saying that the doshas, they don't really exist. What we see as a dosha is nothing but the collective action of these two subdynamics that are happening together. So you have akasha and vayu which function together to give you the resultant vata. So for example, say that you have a football team or a cricket team, and I want to call the team out on the ground. I can't call all the 11 members by the name. Instead I say Indian cricket team assemble. That is how it is. But is there an Indian cricket team? You see that the Indian cricket team members keep changing. So the team name is a collective term given for the function, because all of them are fighting for your country or playing for your country. So the team does not exist in reality, but it is the subdynamics which function together, which are in fact the true existential factors of the Mahabhutas. So here the Jala and the Agni need each other, because what is the Jala and what is Agni? So, for example, the first thing I mentioned is that the difference in potential gradient, voltage, concentration, or any of these differences creates a movement. When you move anything, when anything moves, try rubbing your palms together, heat is generated. The reason being that an atom or an electron, it gets charged. When there is movement, there is a gain of charge or an energy which is gained. The state of energization, the state of activation is the Agni Tattva. It's not fire itself, but it is a state of energized. It's an energized state that we are calling as Agni. Because when it is energized, anything which has too much energy, for example, say that my body is heated up. I've been roaming around in the sun, or I got really angry and I'm burning. I can feel the heat inside. What would we do? I find a bottle of cold water. I would drink it. That is one thing I would do. But I would take the bottle and hold it against my body or my neck to cool myself down. It's because the nature of any atom, when it gets energized, is that its electron jumps up to the highest valence shell. It has more charge, basically the more number of electrons in it. It wants to disperse it off. It wants to give it off. It wants to bind with something else. So when it has energized, it starts to bind or create bonds with other atoms or molecules around it. So that is the Jala Tattva, as Sir mentioned, Shlish Alingani. So this binding nature, that's why Jala has another synonym of Sneha. Sneha meaning affection, bond. And it's quite literally the same thing that we find here, that the chemical bonds, ionic bonds, covalent bonds, all these bonds which occur are a result of the Agni Tattva. So you see that the Jala is not the literal Jala itself that we are talking about, nor is the Agni the literal fire, but it's a tattva, it's a state, it's a dynamics that is taking place within that atom or a cell. And when anything is energized, it wants to disperse, and in that nature or in that manner, it starts to create bonds with other things. So we find the Jala and the Agni existing together here. They're not opposite, because when we think of it superficially, they might appear opposite. But when you understand its true nature, you find that they're dependent on each other, and it's a process. It's the process of how energy is created into matter. And so this is the same example as Sir mentioned with boiling rice. You want to cook rice, you don't take it and put it over fire. You're going to put it in a pot of water and then put it on fire, because the water acts as a buffer for the fire to work through. If I take the rice and put it over the fire, it'll turn into charred ash. And if I try consuming that ash, it's not going to nourish my body. So the Jala over here, the superficial Jala, it instead acts as a buffer for transmitting this heat and doing paka of this rice in a manner that will be sustainable and nourishing for my body. So it buffers the Agni. Similarly, when we study chemistry or electrochemistry, you see that the chemical bonds in any substance or even in your body is the place where energy is stored. Energy is not freely floating around in your body. It's the chemical bonds that are holding two of my cells together, which is holding the Agni Tattva within it. So the Jala is not just it's acting as a platform. So it's being created from Agni, yet it helps in sustaining its own creator, the Agni, by giving a platform to hold it or to bind it together. So the Shlish Alingane, you find that it is not just doing Alingana of the Sthula Sharira, but it's doing Alingana, it's binding the Agni of your body as well. It's holding it within, like a capsule. So this is what it is. And within your body, what you can see is the catalyst. So we have catalysts that are roaming all through our body. And when I talk about chemicals, so the moment I say Pitta, we think, oh, chemicals. But you have a lot of chemicals in your body. And each of these chemicals have different functions. So it's a function that Ayurveda is looking into and not the structural nature of what your body is composed of. So when I talk about catalysts, the catalyst is defined as a reactive protein. So here, in the word itself, in the name itself, you find the two components, which is reactive, which is the Agni Tattva. It is energized and it is ready to react, to combine or to go and catalyze something, because it has so much energy that it wants to disperse it off. It's become reactive. So someone in a state of Pitta, Kopa, anger, he is reactive because he has so much energy that he wants to get it out of him. So that is the Kopa Avastha, the reactiveness. And the protein is a very interesting structure. There are very few molecules. So when I say binding, why does any atom or a molecule bind? Is because it wants to create a balance in its state of existence. Either it has too much energy or a lack of energy. So say that sodium combines with chlorine. Sodium has more electrons. The chlorine has a deficiency of something. So this gives the extra, this fills out its deficiency, and they both become good friends. They bind together and they become one substance. So these are two different atoms or molecules which combine together to become one substance in a balanced nature. But when you look at water and proteins, these are very interesting because you find that these are bipolar in nature. And anything dipolar in nature. And things which are dipolar are substances or molecules which have a positive and a negative charge within itself. It's not outside that they need to go and bind. They have both within themselves. So which is quite literally, Purnamada Purnamudachere, which is, there is everything within yourself. And it's not just philosophy, but it is the reality of your nature, that we have both within ourselves. We have the female and the male within ourselves. That is the advantage of this physical reality that we are composed of. So proteins are the same. They are dipolar in nature, which means that they have a positive and a negative charge, two ends within themselves, which means they're self-bound and they don't need to go and bind with anything else. So these are pure Jala Tattva, not Jala in nature, but Jala Tattva in nature, because they are bonded, self-bonded. And you find that these catalysts, which are floating around in your body doing their job, are again a beautiful example of how Agni and Jala Tattva exist together to carry out its functions, collective function of what we call as Pitta, which is to create transformations in your body. Because Agni needs Jala as a buffer and also Jala as a medium for it to be held within. Next. Finally, kapha. So kapha is, this is the simplest example I always use, is that when you go to the beach and you want to construct anything, you take the loose sand and you try building it, you can't. It's going to keep slipping. So what do? You take some sand from the sea, you bring it, mix it with this loose, you bring water from the sea, you mix it with the loose sand, and with that, you're able to construct anything that you want. So this jala again, which we spoke about previously, is the binding or the bonds in which is the jala tattva. And with the bonds, what happens is, as something keeps binding, so cells become atoms and it keeps conglomerating together. And when this conglomeration happens, after a point, mass is generated. The mass of any substance is what we call as a Prithvi Tattva. It's not just that I see this, projector screen. This is Parthiva alone. So it's not just the physicality that we're talking about. We're talking about the mass of this substance. We're talking about its nature. So when I say mass, for example, I think recently in one of the Independence Days or Republic Day, we had a hologram of our Honorable Prime Minister. So he appeared in the hologram and he gave a speech. So if you try and put your hand through this hologram, your hand will move through. You can see him physically, it appears completely real, but your hand is moving through it. So is that Parthiva? You can't call it Parthiva because it has no mass. When some substance has mass, it offers resistance. So for example, if I were to move this projector with my palm, I'm not able to move it that easily because of the mass of it. Whereas if I had a paper over here or this chair, it's moving easily with the same force that I've given. So you see that the Parthiva Tattva, Prithvi Tattva is lesser here because the mass of it is lesser. So ultimately it is this entire process of the three doshas that we call, because these two function together to collectively do the function of what we term as kapha. So it is our understanding of it, but the Sat dynamics is of the 5 Mahabhutas which is taking place within your body. So this is just an example I gave, because without the Jala Tattva, this is what will happen to the Parthiva Tattva. It would flake off. As you see in psoriasis, you have a lot of flaking that keeps happening. Why is this flaking happening? Is because the tissue bond within is being destroyed or broken. The Jala Tattva is lost, and there's a breakdown and a wear and tear. So this is the Mahabhuta transition. Next one. Next. Transition of Akasha to Prithvi. How a negative potential or a potential difference for that reason creates movement or current, and that makes something energized or reactive. And when something becomes reactive, it starts to bind together, and as things bind together, mass is generated. Energy leading to the creation of matter, and matter back into the creation of energy. So that's why I've used a two-way arrow here, because this process from Akasha to Prithvi is Laya and the reverse is Pralaya. And when you apply it into Chikitsa, it is nothing but Brahmana and Langana. And if you want to go deeper into it, then we apply the concept of Shadvida Upakrama, which is again a breakdown of this overall superficial function of Laya and Pralaya that we are seeing. So the Laya and Pralaya that we're talking about in the external universe is the same thing that we're applying in Chikitsa and in understanding disease within your body, in the concept of Langana Brahmana, Santarpanajana Vyadis, Apatarpanajana Vyadis as well. Previous. Back. So this is an overview regarding the Ayurvedic understanding of the mechanics of the body, the dynamics that take place within. And when we go a step beyond it, comes the understanding of the energetics. What is powering this? So now I have a phone, and when I talk about the phone, it's the mechanics. I'm talking about how my phone is working, the software is working. But what is making the phone work is a battery within it. So this battery is the concept of the prana, agni and the ojas that we are going to go into now. Because ultimately, if you correct the battery, this is an organic body. This is an inorganic substance which is incapable of self-correction. But our body, which has a natural tendency towards homeostasis, is always self-correcting and auto-correcting in nature, self-healing, provided that the battery is functional and the energy is provided for the function to happen. So for me to be able to stand and talk to all of you here, this talking is the process or a function that I'm doing. So like Vata, Pitta and Kapha. But for me to function, I need food in my stomach, and I need that food to provide me with energy. So that is what we are going to go into now. So this Um, yeah. So this is the concept of piezoelectricity, which I wanted to talk about a little because these are things that we don't really think about. We limit ourselves to only the mechanical aspect of what we are doing in Chikitsa. But the same mechanical treatments, for example, that's what I'm going to deal with now, with the Shirodhara, the Dhara, the process of Dhara, the process of Agni Karma, and the process, I'm just going to give a glimpse of Kshara Karma. Why are these our greatest tools in an emergency? Because I've used these quite a bit, and you saw how Sir showed a demonstration of Dhara being able to resuscitate someone. So what is happening is that you can just show the slide with the 5 Mahabhutas came to an end. In most of the emergency conditions, so when I say emergency, it can be an acute condition. So it doesn't mean that it has to have occurred only now. So we find critical cases and intensive care as well coming under the concept of where you need emergency intervention. So it's not an emergency occurrence. It's an emergency. Where is emergency intervention required? So that is what we're going to deal with here. So we find that even in chronic cases as well, what happens is beyond a point, there is a lack of movement of the Vayu. Ultimately, the Agni goes down. The Dhatus, in case of a chronic condition, the Parthiva Tattva is deteriorated, leading to Dhatu Shaitilya. In case of an acute condition, it is a problem with the Akasha and the Vayu that is occurring. And the Agni is always your in-between factor. I always call it as the factor which determines the transmission or the transformation of energy to matter and matter back into energy. Western science sees this as, just one entity. It says that energy is E is equal to mc square. But we understand that there is a factor which determines how much of this E becomes mc square and how much of the mc square becomes E back again. That is the Agni Tattva that we have the concept and understanding of. And the Akasha is another big stronghold that we have, because according to Western science, energy cannot be created or destroyed, but we know how to create it. That is where we hold our biggest strength, which is the concept of Akasha Tattva. We know how to induce Akasha Tattva in order to resuscitate or to enliven a dead tissue. So when something is considered dead, in case of a gangrene, in case of a cell death, so that is when you say that this person is out. And yet we have Jiva Stapana as a treatment methodology. It's not just resuscitation of something which is almost alive or little alive, something that's completely dead. Beyond a point, before the material degenerates, you have the capacity to induce life back into it. So this is something that's possible only by our science, because we have the concept of Akasha. Just like how we discovered the value of 0. So ask anybody the value of 0, they say that 0 is invaluable. You ask a non-mathematician. You ask a mathematician, he'll tell you that 0 is the most valuable number. It is 0 which gives value to any other number as well. Similarly is our Akasha Tattva. It is this Akasha which leads or creates the formation of life, or that stimulates everything to function. Without that Akasha Tattva, this whole world would not have been created. The universe would be in a very still state. That's why we find the shloka telling us that Akashat Vayu, Vayu Agni, Agni Jala, and Jala leading to Prithvi. So what is this Akasha Tattva? Is nothing but you being able to induce a difference in this potential, charge, voltage, concentration, pressure through different methods. So that is what we are actually doing when we are doing Dhara, when you're doing Agni Karma, or any of these parasurgical procedures that we consider, not just the Shastra Karma alone, but these procedures are able to induce a movement again. So what happens to the Vata in such a state is that it enters into Muda Avastha. So when we say something is Muda, it means that it's still. So Muda Avastha can occur when there is a lack of Akasha Tattva. So it is different from Avarana. So Avarana is when any of these other factors create an interference. So when your Dhatu becomes weak, or when there's an actual loss of the bondage within, loss of binding within, the structure can create an interference to the flow of energy. But when we say Muda Vata, it is that the structure is fine, but energy is still not able to move. So why is it unable to move? Is because there is no Akasha Tattva over there. So we are able to induce this Akasha Tattva through our methodologies, and we'll go and see into how this is done and how it's possible. You can go to the piezoelectricity. The next slide will have a video. You can just play this. So you see here, this is not just a show that is happening here. What we are doing to the linga, the Shiva linga, is in fact it's a wonderful. I have no words for it. It's beyond my grasp as to how our ancient scientists were able to comprehend and create such devices. These are, you can't connect a wire or a device to check its electricity and how much voltage it's generating, because these are generated at a frequency which is biocompatible. So is electricity good for you? No. If I sit next to this tube light or a bulb for more than 5 hours, I will definitely get a headache. We think we have amazing scientists. Our science has advanced because of the creation or the technologies that we have had around us. But we know how much destruction it has actually brought. It's brought convenience, but double the amount of destruction and harm than it has actually done. What our scientists knew is to how to create the same forms of energy, but that is biocompatible and that is useful for you to enhance your bodily functions. So what is happening here in the Shirodhara is that in piezoelectricity, whenever pressure falls upon any substance which is capable of micro vibration or vibrating, and as we know, all our body tissues vibrate, they move for the function to happen. If my food has to get digested, my intestine has to have the process of peristalsis. There has to be an anulomana gati. This anuloma gati is the movement of vayu, the vibration at a micro level and at a macro level that happens. For example, now say that my liver or my pancreas have to secrete the enzymes that they do. It has to pump, it has to contract and expand for the juice to be secreted out. So is the same with all my endocrine glands inside. So each and every part of my body, including the cell, has to pump, to push and to receive. So without this movement, it enters into a muda avastha. So what is happening here is that when you induce pressure from outside, you're inducing a vibration, and that vibration in turn generates a micro frequency of electricity at a very micro level. But it's not just micro that you cannot measure it. There are devices and tools that can measure this, and it has been measured as well. So yes. So these are studies which have been done, and you can see that the piezoelectricity of the human pineal gland is a proper study which has been done, where they have done this to understand that pressure which is induced from outside can generate microelectricity within. So what you're doing in Shirodhara or any sort of dhara throughout your body is that when you induce pressure, which I'll deal with in the later slide. In physics, we have studied the relation between pressure, volume, and temperature. 3 of these are proportional to each other. One increases, the other one decreases, and these function together. And what happens is when you induce a pressure and when the volume is constant, you're inducing more temperature. You're creating an opening up. You're allowing for the channels to open, dilate. And when this dilates, the occlusion is cleared. You're making whatever is blocking to either move, or in case of, what I call as an ischemia, you're making that whatever is blocking due to 2 causes. One is the blockage, the cause of the blockage within the emboli itself, and the dhatu which is conducting the vessels. So when the vessel becomes stiff, it doesn't happen in a sudden case. In a chronic case, when you keep doing rukshana of your body, the vessels which should be flexible, even the blood vessels need to pump in order to push the blood through them. What happens is, in the due course of time, there's a rukshana which occurs, which makes your vessels, which makes your soft tissues stiff and hard. So once it is stiff, it's not able to contract and expand on its own, which causes the block or the emboli to get lodged in that particular place. So when you induce, or when you do Shirodhara, you are inducing a mechanical force which allows for these vessels to open up or to pump again, a micro peristalsis of your blood vessels, which clears the occlusion. At a macro level, in the level of Vata, Pitta and Kapha, this is what is happening. But in the level of Prana, what you're also doing is that the cells or the tissue which is damaged and dying out is given prana once again. You're giving voltage, you're giving micro electricity for the tissue to restart and reboot itself again. Because ultimately when you consume food, your food goes inside, it converts into ATP, converts into energy, and this energy is gone and converts into prana to sustain all of your tissues inside. When you do this process, it's a shortcut process. Instead of using food as a medium to go and nourish and give prana, which would take 3 or 4 days, you're creating this micro vibration and you're generating electricity which re-stimulates all of your brain cells and wakes them back up from a state of almost death. So it's not just an occlusion that you're clearing, but you're enlivening, you're giving prana to something once again. You're giving life to something once again. So that's what the dhara does, and that's what happens when you do a dhara or an abhisheka over the linga. You're generating, so you sit next to a linga while the abhisheka is going on, close your eyes and actually observe. You'll feel very static. You'll feel a stillness within yourself. The stillness is because of the static electricity which is being generated from the Shivalinga as abhisheka is occurring. And for extra reference, you can just go and refer Van de Graaff generator, it's static electricity generator. So you can do it in your time and see, compare how the linga and this is literally one and the same in its mechanics. The next slide. Next. So this is a video that I found 3 weeks ago. I was taking a session on Vrena, and I was just doing little research, and you can just play this video.
Did you know electricity can help heal wounds faster? The skin's natural regenerative process includes 4 stages: hemostasis, inflammation, proliferation, and remodeling. Researchers found that skin cells are electrostatic, meaning they migrate directionally in electric fields. By placing a wound under an electric field, it healed 3 times faster than usual. This method also shows promise for chronic non-healing wounds, like those experienced by diabetics. With continued research, customized stimulation based on individual wounds could make chronic non-healing wounds a thing of the past. Electricity in wound healing may sound Frankensteinish, but don't knock it until you try it.
So it's literally your whole body which depends on prana. So prana is not oxygen. It's not a chemical which is going inside and giving you, life. It is the oxygen goes and generates electricity within your body, which is the actual prana that we're talking about, and which sustains, which is a primary basic form of energy. As this energy transforms, it becomes more refined into Agni and finally transforms into Ojas, which is Agni Somatmakam. So it's the same thing that happens with the brain. You're giving prana that allows for the tissue to quickly redevelop and reheal itself, repair itself from a state of damage. This is done, and in Vrena Chikitsa, interestingly, you find one of the methods of treatment for Vrena is mantra. So what is the mantra doing is that you're generating an electric charge, you're generating a frequency over there which allows for that tissue to heal faster. And it's not just mantra, but rasa aushadhis work on this principle as well. So that's where we have a little gap in understanding how rasa dravyas work, because they are more subtle. Subtle as in not philosophically subtle, and the subtle you can't see, but they're subtle because they work on the level of energy within your body. Next. So next is pyroelectricity. So we don't just do abhisheka to the linga, we hold the fire and we do, the arati of it always. Any sort of deity or any sort of this thing, we do an arati. So what happens is, in pyroelectricity, whenever there is a difference in the heat or temperature from one point or one region to another, because say that my head is hot and my body, the lower part of my body is cold, what happens? There's an automatic flow of electrons from this hot region to the cold region. This flow of electron is electricity again. So what we're doing in Agni Karma is that when you induce a shock, you're creating an electric shock. You're creating a shock by creating a difference in temperature. Earlier, while we were doing the Dhara, you created a difference in pressure. Here, you're inducing a difference in temperature. This difference in temperature allows for prana to flow again. So what happens is, the part which is damaged or repaired or any sort of occlusion that is occurring over there, the prana really it runs through. There's a jolt of electricity that passes through that allows for the tissue to repair itself. Because of the occlusion, it is avrita. So because of the avarana, there's a kshaya that is occurring. So how do you re-trigger something that is undergoing degeneration? Is by giving prana in this shortcut manner. So Agni Karma is again the same method of giving arati, or what we are doing here is we are inducing a temperature difference which allows for the prana to flow again and allow the body to heal itself or repair itself. So that's why they say that this you find in acupuncture or moxibustion or in Varma, they say that if you do these procedures alone, it's only temporary, it's only temporary. It's temporary in the sense that you are allowing the body to reboot itself. So you need to go and you need to take care of your body, be through a proper discipline without creating interference to the healing process, which none of us do, which is patya. So rasa dravyas and Varma, so Siddha and Varma, they require the person to follow a very strict regimen and discipline. But these methods help in shortcutting, they help in bypassing the usual methodology that your body would have to undergo in a process of healing. Next. This is just a video of Agni Karma that I So that's why we say that ultimately everything is Jwara. If you understand Jwara, you have mastered everything. Literally, because every single disease process that occurs in your body is the same basic mechanics, but that replicates itself at different levels of the dhatu or in different parts of your body. So everything is ultimately Jwara when you understand what is happening in Jwara. So when they say that, the Agni of the Amashaya is displaced and it goes to your periphery, and that is what creates the Jwara as, the Roga that we see, is that we see it as a disease and we try to immediately bring down the temperature. Even the Ayurvedic physician is unfortunately trying to do the same thing by reducing the temperature instantly without realizing what is actually happening within your body. So what is happening is, because of all the nidanas that you've undergone, say, I'll take the example of Vata Jwara alone here. So in case of Vata Jwara, I've done complete Rukshana, I've done, Patya, I've done complete Apatya. I've damaged the Agni. So what is happening here is, my Koshta has undergone Stambhana. So for me to be hungry, for the Pitta in my body to be released, my stomach has to pump, my intestine has to undergo peristalsis. Only when there is a movement that occurs will the feedback go to my brain saying that, okay, this is functional, now it's time to secrete something to digest the food. If there is no movement, my brain knows that there's no point putting anything inside because it's going to get stuck or stagnated within. So when there is a Stambhana that occurs over here in my Koshta, the Agni is not functioning because there is no stimulation for the Agni to be released, the Pitta to be released. So in that process, what the body does to generate heat again is that it occludes all of your external shrotas, your Svedava shrotas is occluded. So it's a very simple example to understand this is, say that this is winter, the midwinter, and we have a heater in the room. The heater is not working. It's repaired, it's damaged. Now all of us are freezing. How can I make this room warm again? Simple way is to lock all the windows and doors and close it. That would generate the heat again, once again, by creating an occlusion. That's the same thing that your body is trying to do. It's trying to create an occlusion all around to rebuild that heat, and hopefully thinking that that heat that is created throughout the body would help dilate my koshta, my stomach and my intestine once again. Because we know that heat causes Svedana, Ushna causes Svedana, Shita causes Stambhana. So when I say Svedana, it's the dilation of any soft tissue or any passage within your body. So your body is in fact trying to repair itself. But when this becomes exaggerated, when you add on to it and don't understand that this is the core problem, that is when it actually becomes a proper full-fledged disease. But otherwise, the Jwara is a method or a mechanism of your body trying to protect itself. So just like how Sir mentioned in case of Pakshagata, what is happening is that occlusion is created, but the swelling is formed as a means to, the body is trying to heal itself, it's trying to repair itself, but we are adding on to that pressure. And instead of that heat allowing for the clot to dissolve and the vessel to dilate, instead it's creating more and more pressure. So that's a build-up that we are doing because of our improper method of approaching the healing process. So ultimately everything is Jwara. Each and every disease, be it Gulma, be it Rakta Pitta, Vata Rakta, everything at a fundamental level is your body trying to correct itself, but based upon the different dhatus. So that's why Charakacharya, he beautifully gives you in Nidanasthana. In Chikitsa Sana, you find 30 chapters explaining how to fix 30 different pathologies, not diseases, pathology, pathophysiologies. But when it comes to Nidana, he gives only 8. Why is that? Because this delineation of 8 is that the same process of Jwara is happening in Rasa, Rakta, Mamsa, Meda, Asti, Majja, Shukra, and finally it is Ojas which is lost, Ojo Nasha, which is happening in case of Apasmara. So we find that this 8-level process is the same process of Jwara which is happening at different multitudes of your dhatus. When you master Jwara, you have mastered everything. So what is happening is that, when we talk about the volume, pressure and temperature, we're talking about the volume or the mass, I'm not going to equate it with kapha, but it's the understanding of the kapha which is brought within. The pressure being the vata, the mechanics, and the temperature, which is the pitta, the tattva of pitta. So all three, just like sir mentioned, it's a triangle. When one increases, the other two automatically proportionally differ in their value. So the whole process of Jwara is basically this: when the volume is constant, but the pressure is built within to induce a temperature rise or a gain. Same thing that happens in Pakshagata, as sir mentioned. And that happens in each and every disease. So what you see as an inflammation is primarily this, which is happening at a very fundamental level. Next. Yeah. So what we are doing through our process of Agni Karma, Shirodhara, Sarvangadhara, any of these is that you're trying to work with the volume, with the pressure, and with the temperature. And you're using different methods. In Agni Karma, you're using temperature as a means of creating a change. In case of Dhara, you're using pressure as a means of creating a change. So the difference in the approach comes when you want to either relax or when you want to push. So say that there's already a hemorrhage happening. I don't want to give Agni Karma or more Agni and create more explosion within. I just want the whole passage, because why does an explosion happen? Why is an hemorrhage happening within? Is because your tissue, your soft tissue, if it is actually flexible and like a rubber band, which it should be like, it would encompass, it would allow for the pressure to move through, it would allow for anything to flow through. It is because of the dhatu which has become very stira, and stira not in a good way, it's become katina. So that doesn't allow for any further flow, and then there's a rupture in the vessel that occurs. So in that case, I want to induce Akasha Tattva to relax the tissue. I don't want to, I don't want to induce Svedana to push it further. There's already a pushing that is happening. So I just need to relax it. You do Shirodhara or Dhara, the tissue is relaxed instantly. There is a dilation that happens in a very gentle manner. You're allowing for Akasha Tattva through pressure. Whereas say that there is a proper occlusion, there I would go for something like Agni Karma, because it's not that dilation that I need, but I need to induce a force to push whatever is occluding it physically as well. So I'm trying to dilate but push as well. So there comes the application of Dhara and Agni Karma as two opposite means, but to induce the same concept of moving the Muda Vata. So ultimately, any emergency is this primary function that's happening here. You're trying to make the Vata, which is in a Stamba Avastha or a Muda Avastha, to function again. So because what you're trying to do is Vyadhi Viparita, not Hetu Viparita. You're not trying to reverse the whole disease process. So that is the concept of Ama Stambhana, as sir mentioned, and that we'll speak about in our last slide. So this is where Rasa Shastra comes into play again. So why do all your Rasa Dravyas, okay, not all, maybe 95%, 98% of the Rasa Dravyas have Parada and Gandhaka as a base? Is because of this reason. You're trying to work on the Ida Nadi and the Pingla Nadi. So it's not just the tube, there are not two tubes or passages which are running from your toe to your nostril. These are dynamics again. The Ushna Shita that we see or understand in Ayurveda is dealt in more detail, or what we consider as Prabhava is the fundamental understanding of what Siddha is based upon. So you're basically trying to either create Akasha Tattva through Parada, or you're trying to give Agni Tattva through Gandhaka. So these are the two primary factors to create the Chalana of Vata within your body again. And when Vata moves, Prana is generated and there is life in your body. When there is Prana in your body is capable of healing itself, taking care of itself, and repairing and restoring itself. It just needs that prana. It's the lack of prana, the lack of movement, lack of electricity in your body that doesn't allow it to heal any further, and a constant deterioration of your condition happens. If you provide prana, you don't need to take care of anything. You don't need to worry about anything else, provided you take care of your patya and other factors. So the salt that they mention is where Kshara Karma comes into place. Kshara Karma is a very interesting concept, because Kshara Karma, when you study it, the gunas of Kshara, it is Agnya and it is Saumya in nature. It has both encompassed within it. So it works in a dual manner. So when you apply Kshara to any part, you see that it starts to froth, it starts to bubble. There is an Akasha Tattva, the Ka Guna, the Akasha Guna is again created by creating an erosion. It erodes away the destructive tissue, destroyed tissue, allowing for space. Again, there is space, and once your body notices or realizes there is space, it allows for new tissue to regenerate in that place. At the same time, it also encompasses Agni Tattva, which acts as a catalyst, which allows, like I said, we spoke about the Agni Tattva or the reactiveness, which makes or gives your cells energy to function again. Without energy, you're not going to be functioning again. You don't have anything to do. So you're given the space to function or to restore yourself, and you're given the energy to do that function. So these are the three primary, so we'll talk about the Panchalohas, because in Siddha you have the concept of Ashtadhatu, Saptadhatu, then comes the concept of Panchadhatu, Panchaloha, which is very important in Siddha. In Siddha they say that if you have, I was having a discussion with Abhimanyu, Dr. Abhimanyu, and we were talking about the Panchaloha Kattu, which is a traditional preparation prepared by his parents and his ancestors. So this Panchaloha Kattu, if you have this in hand, it corrects everything. You are taking care of all the 5 Mahabhutas. You're given the energy until the stabilization of matter. So all the entire process of what your body goes through in a physiological aspect is corrected. If this correction happens at a subtle level, the doshas will automatically function. So you find that the concept of Vriddhi and Kshaya doesn't exist in Siddha. It is only Prakriti Sthapana. Because if you give the subtle factor, the energy which is required for your body to heal, the Vata, whether it is in a Vriddhi Avastha or a Kshaya Avastha, will come to a Sama Avastha automatically. It is capable of self-correction, provided that the subtler factor is given, which is the Prana, Agni and the Ojas for the Vata, Pitta and the Kapha to function normally. So in our Rasavidya, we find that Mercury or Parada is the factor which provides this Prana for your body to correct itself. The Gandhaka or even Tamra being more Tikshna, we find Gandhaka is used as a more Saumya version of it. Just like how Abraka is also given a phenomenon of Kha, but it is Chedi, does Chedana. So sulfur, so instead of that we have the more Saumya version of it, which is Parada, which is used for the body. So similarly Gandhaka is a more safer form of this Agni which is given to your body. So for the Agni or the Tejas to be provided, which allows a Pitta to self-correct itself. And finally when you give gold, as we know, and I've been using all these, these are researches which have been done in current, physics, and they tell you its application in industries, in chemical reactions, and within the body itself. Gold, as we know, is the noblest metal because it's the most stable metal that exists, that it does not react. So what the gold does is, it goes within your body and creates a tissue stability. The Parthiva Guna or the Parthiva Tattva is restored. So it doesn't go and feed your body. We're not nourishing the body. Instead, it goes and acts as a catalyst, allowing your body to recognize what it is and to come to that particular state or generate tissue which is of that nature. So that is how the Rasadravyas work. All of them work as catalysts in the way that they don't go and get absorbed in your body. They go, they trigger your tissue, your body recognizes that, okay, this is the nature of the material which has been provided to me, and what I need to start producing from now on should be of this nature. Because as your body goes into Sama Avastha, the dhatus which are formed are also Sama dhatus. That leads to what we call as autoimmune conditions. But ultimately any condition, any disease enters into autoimmune Avastha towards the end when the dhatus become Shaitilya. Why do the dhatus become Shaitilya? Is that the Prakrita dhatu is not formed beyond the point when the Agni is low. Instead, you have the Vikrita dhatu. So when these are provided, this allows the body to recognize that this should be what I should be processing and generating, allowing it to restore itself to that particular nature. So Parada, Prana, Gandhaka, Agni, and Swarna, Ojas, which is why women wear gold jewelry, because it stabilizes the energy within them. Next. Yeah. So these are the Panchalohas as used in Siddha medicine. And what Siddha medicine does is they understand alternates as well. So instead of Tamra, you use Gandhaka, and instead of Rajata, you can use Naga, and instead of Swarna, you use Vanga. So Vanga, we find its use a lot. It's being used a lot in in medicine because it stabilizes. So why is Trivanga so popular in Prameha? What does it do in Prameha? Is that modern science or a little bit of research shows that it is it does mimicry. It mimics your insulin. But it's not just that. What it does is it stabilizes your tissue. In Prameha, what is happening is your dhatus are primarily breaking down and it is melting out. I'm using crude terms here, but there's a vilayana of the dhatus which is happening because the Jalatattva is not well formed. So your body, which would be Parthiva in nature, Sthira in nature, is undergoing vilayana. And as you see, the person who is nice, well and well built becomes Krisha after a point. But before becoming Krisha, they undergo a mild Stulatva in between that. So that is the time when all the dhatus have become shitila, it's become flabby. And after the flabbiness, your body can hold it only for a point. And when it finally collapses, everything is gone out and you become Krisha. When you use Vanga or Trivanga Basma, you're creating that ojas, you're binding the tissues back together, allowing to hold. So you're creating tissue stability. You're generating that mass again, which allows you to not degenerate or break down any further. It instantly stabilizes your body. So this, you find that Parada, ayers until this are corrosive in nature, whereas silver and gold are anti-corrosive. So what is actually happening here is, so when there is no Vayu moving and you want to induce life, you use the first two depending on the avastha, whether it's the lack of Akasha or you want to create a little more force with Vayu, they use Parada and ayers. In these two, say that, so now say that your body is highly reactive. It is in a kopa avastha. The pitta is in a very in an aggravated state. So then, when you use Rajata, it acts as a jala by binding that heat, trapping that heat within. So it doesn't disperse the heat, because if you disperse that heat off, the Agni is gone from your body. There is no life. So you need to retain that heat, but you need to control it. You need to insulate it. That's why we use Rajata. And what Swarna does is, when your body is completely collapsing, you use it as a Ama Stambhana, like we were discussing. It causes, you're not reversing the pathology here. You're not trying to reverse the whole process, but because like Sir said, by the time you do the reversal of the Samprapti and restore the Prakrita Dhatu, the person is gone. Because the body, as we see in Raja Yakshma, why does death occur when the person passes stools? Is that it's quite literally that the stools inside is filling out the intestine. And as the intestine is filled out, the body recognizes that there's something holding it from within that keeps it from collapsing. The moment the intestine collapses, because the entire dhatus of the body are in a very shitila avastha, or in a very, the binding nature is gone. So if this is the central, what I call as the central core of the body. In Siddha, we have a saying that Kudal Virindal, Udal Viryum, Kudal Suringinal, Udal Surungum, which is that if your intestine bloats up, your entire body bloats up. If your intestine shrinks, your entire body shrinks, which is the same concept of what we understand more functionally as the relation between the Dhatva Agnis and the Kaya Agni, both of them having a Paraspara Sambandha. So this determines the state of your entire body. So as your intestine is filled out with the stools, your entire body is also functioning. The Strothas is kept dilated and functional. If the intestine collapses, because your entire body is in a collapsed state, so if the intestine also collapses, the jiva is immediately lost, because the dhatus have nothing holding it from within. They should be self-sustaining. For example, this pillar should be strong on its own. It doesn't need any external strength and support. But after 200 years, this pillar won't have that strength. So what we would do then is that we would put wooden sticks all through this room to support the roof on top. So that is what the stools or the motion inside the Rajekshma patient is doing. It's artificially holding the body from within, creating pressure to keep all the Shrotas dilated. And if even that is lost, the entire body collapses. So what we are doing as Ama Stambhana here is that you're creating tissue stability. You're sustaining the tissue at that moment to not collapse within itself and to stay alive or to keep itself functional, at least for the time being. This is not going to reverse the process. It's not going to reverse the normal dhatus back again, which would have to be your second course of action. But for that moment, it allows you from collapsing. So you're doing Stambhana of the Ama. You're not doing Pachana. If you want to do Pachana, you would use Tambra, but that is not what you would use here. You try using Tambra in a patient with tuberculosis, within half an hour he's gone. He would pass stools, and within 10 minutes of passing stools, his life is lost. Next. That's it. I think I ran through it a little faster than I thought. But yeah, so this is our science, Siddha and Ayurveda, and what it actually is. And it's beautiful physics. It's not just physics of the human body. When you understand it, it's the physics of the universe around you and your body. And when you understand this, you've understood everything. And understanding diseases, understanding physiology, and understanding pathology and the treatment becomes effortless in that manner. So it's not just the mechanics that we look at, but the energetics, which is sustaining or leading the dynamics to occur in your body. So each function needs a specific energy. So Ojas is a more subtler form. So the function of integral, keeping your structural integrity is Kapha. But what is the energy behind it is the binding energy. So that is the Ojas, the Jala Tattva. No? So in Siddha, they say that they don't have the concept of, when you ask them what is Pitta made up of, they won't say Agni and Jala, they'll say only Agni. Because for them it is the Sukshma Tejas that they are calling as Pitta. And whereas for the Kapha, they say that it is Jala. Because the concept of Nadi also comes from this understanding. Because the Siddhas, they use 5 fingers for diagnosing. So they use the thumb to understand your life, which is the Akasha Tattva. Then they see the Vayu, then they see the Jala, the Agni, the Jala, and they finally use a little finger to understand the Parthiva Tattva of your body. So this is the actual understanding. And when we use only 3 fingers to see the Nadi, but we don't really go into a complete understanding of the doshas, because to understand doshas, you need to use all the 5 fingers and use that as a combined result. So we do have our derivation, we do gain some knowledge from seeing Nadi, but it's actually the 5-finger method that tells you the state of all the 5 Mahabhutas in your body. So this is a subtler dynamics which is taking place, and that makes it easier to understand treatment, all of Ayurveda and Siddha. So the integration that I try to practice more is between Siddha, because for me Siddha is very similar to allopathy. They understand, because it is Avastha Vishesha. Avastha Vishesha in the sense it helps you sustain things at that moment. You're not trying to spoon feed the person throughout the process of healing. Ayurveda, I see it as Sukha Chikitsa. The person might follow Patya to an extent, but you're taking care of the Agni, you're taking care of the Dhatus, and you're taking care of, so you're doing Deepana, Pachana, and finally you're doing Dhatu, you're doing Rasayana Chikitsa to restore the Dhatus. In Siddha, none of this is involved. You just give catalysts, you leave the person to heal by himself. So it's very much more precise and accurate. You're not seeing Avastha, you're not seeing Dosha, you're not seeing Samprapti, none of this is seen. You're just giving it for that. So the Kutaras, many of the Kutaras that we use, Shwasa Kutara, Kasa Kutara. So these in Siddha, there's a separate classification known as Kudoris. The Kudoris are the ones which work on Vyadhi Viparita and not Hetu Viparita. So you have Gulma Kudori, you have Shwasa Kudori, Kasa Kudori, Shula Kudori. So you have multiple Kudoris which help you sustain the body at that particular moment or that particular condition. But they're not going to heal the entire disease as well. So for which you will have to undergo. What I do is I give this on one side and I give Ayurveda Chikitsa on one side to repair the body or spoon feed the body. Because that's why my guru used to tell me that no one is fit to take Siddha medicines in this era, because no one has a discipline and regimen. So which makes Ayurveda the most apt to be used for people in this current era. But a little bit of shortcut that would help is using these minerals on the side, which accelerate the process of healing. Because you're providing the subtle thing that your body needs to correct itself, instead of spoon feeding the whole body through the process of healing. So if there are any questions. Yes, Varma. Sorry, pain management. Yes. So this is primarily what we're doing in Varma. In Varma, you're using the concept of Dhara, but in a micro level. So you're using pressure. So in Dhara, what we do is we use Takra Dhara, Taila Dhara, and we use Kashaya Dhara. Here what we're doing is we're using different materials based on the density of that material. You see that Taila is the most dense, Kashaya is the least dense, and Takra is in between the two. So you use it for Vata, you use Taila for Vata, because the more dense something is, the more it makes the Chalana, it arrests the Chalana of Vata. The least dense is Kashaya, which allows for a little bit more Chalana to happen. Whereas you see Takra, which which is an in-between factor that works aptly for Pitta. So the same concept of how we are using density of the material to, based on the dosha. Similarly, what they do is they have the concept of pressure, matra alavu. So you give different levels of pressure depending on what you're trying to induce. So it's the same concept of dara that we are using it at a micro level. So Varma works or functions on the same process. When you give prana, so the pain can occur due to either an occlusion. So basically the particular part is not receiving blood, circulation, nourishment, any of these factors. So when I give prana, that part is immediately dilated. It goes, there's a voltage which is sent that allows for the dilation of the soft tissue in that particular part, and there's a repair of that automatically occurs. So that's why in actual Varma practice, without mantra, the practitioners don't touch a point, because you're trying to provide, literally you're trying to provide voltage, micro voltage to a soft tissue to allow it to regenerate again. And what we do is, so the same Agni Karma is also used by the Varma practitioners, or even the Tibetan practitioners, Tibetan and Chinese. They have this treatment of moxibustion. So on the particular point, they put a needle, and on top of the needle they put a herb, and they burn that herb. So there's a mild heat, very mild heat that won't burn your skin, but a mild heat which is generated, which creates a temperature change. So this is mild form of Svedana which you're giving, which again allows for the prana to flow through. So Varma again works on this same principle of Dhara and the Agni Karma, but on a more micro level and more accurate level that you're doing it. So at most of the points, the Marma points, to understand Varma points, it's not just Marma that we need to compare it to. You look at the points mentioned by Sushruta Acharya for bloodletting, you'll find that these exactly correspond with the Varma points of the Varma science.
Physics in the universe, in the body, Tridoshas, Varma, and how the Dhara and Agni Karma, everything comparing along with Siddha and Ayurveda and correlating each other. Very wonderful job. Thank you. Thanks a lot.